President Trump issued a memo last night suspending federal funding and ordering all federal agencies to come into compliance with the order by 5 p.m. Eastern Time today, which has come and gone. And of course, a federal judge has already blocked the order temporarily. But in the less than 24 hours between when the issue was ordered and when it was blocked, it caused complete chaos in the federal government, and headlines exploded with proclamations about the end of our democracy and dictatorships and whatnot. So it's temporarily blocked. It seems like a good time to take a breath and take a little bit of a deeper look at what's really at issue here, which is the president's ability to impound federal funds, which have been appropriated by Congress. And when you get down into the heart of the matter, it's not actually as straightforward as it might seem. But a good place to start is probably by looking at the actual text of the memo that was issued last night. So here's the memo itself, and highlighted in yellow here is the part of the memo that has people crying foul in terms of the constitutionality of this order. It says, career and political appointees in the executive branch have a duty to align federal spending and action with the will of the American people as expressed through presidential priorities. So that's the part of the language that has people so up in arms. The language sounds like the words of a dictator, right? Implying that the will of the people is expressed through one person, the president, which is counter to our ideals as a representative democracy. Here in the United States, citizens vote for government officials, with each state electing 2 senators and each district within the state electing their members in the House of Representatives. These elected officials are supposed to represent the ideas and the concerns of their citizens in the government, passing laws and appropriation bills which include public funding, which is taxpayer dollars, to support their enforcement. It's not the president who is assigned to create laws and allocate federal funds. The president is the leader of the executive branch, and the executive branch is charged with enforcing laws written by Congress and by implementing programs and regulations to carry out those laws. So the wording is definitely concerning because it sounds like he's trying to shift power from the legislative branch to the executive branch, and it's a violation of both our Constitution and the Impound Control Act of 1974. What President Trump did, trying to withhold federal funds that had already been appropriated by Congress, is called a presidential impound. And presidential impounds have an interesting history. The Constitution doesn't grant the president power to withhold funds that have already been appropriated by Congress, but in the past, laws were written quite differently, and appropriations used to authorize the president to spend up to, but not more than, a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time to achieve certain objectives. And presidents, starting with our third president, Thomas Jefferson, were able to then interpret the language in those appropriations to say, this money is no longer necessary, and so therefore we're not going to spend it. In the case of President Jefferson, there was money appropriated by Congress to acquire gunships to patrol the Mississippi, and by the time the law was passed, he said that the conditions that necessitated gunships patrolling the Mississippi no longer existed, therefore it didn't make sense to spend that money, and instead it would be used to pay down the federal deficit. And he got away with that. And so that established a historical precedent. Subsequently, other presidents, including Eisenhower, Truman, Kennedy, Nixon, among many others, used this historical precedent to impound money and block spending on things they felt were no longer needed, or they felt like perhaps it could be done more cost effectively. And that continued until Nixon was the president, when he impounded so much money, about a third of all federal appropriations, and he did it in a way that was not necessarily sensitive to ongoing need or budget deficits, but he did it to advance his own political policies and to block policies he didn't agree with, even though Congress had already voted them into law. So that prompted Congress to pass the Impound Control Act in 1974, which basically laid out a process by which presidents could try to rescind or take back or reduce congressional appropriations for things that they felt were not necessary or where they thought the spending was excessive. And it gave Congress the right to review those requests and approve or deny them within 45 days, in which case then the funds needed to be released. So it didn't outlaw what's called impounds per se, but it laid out a procedure by which impounds could be accomplished. So that was Congress's view of it, but most modern presidents have tried to regain their impound powers, saying that the Impound Control Act, or the ICA, is overly cumbersome to comply with, and they need more flexibility to ensure that the government operates efficiently, and money can be frozen when a policy no longer makes sense. For example, if Congress were to appropriate money to build a dam, and the president felt that that dam could be built for a substantial amount less money, they might want to impound some of the funds so that the dam was built cost effectively. And it's not clear that the president doesn't have to disperse all of the funds appropriated, whether they're needed or not. Similarly, if funds are allocated to a technology that no longer makes sense to the president, as in the case of the B-70 bomber, which funding for which President Kennedy impounded, they may try to block those funds and instead use those funds for something that accomplishes the same goal but makes more strategic sense to the president. Presidents have long tried to get line item veto power to kind of create a backdoor method of impounding funds. And that law was finally passed by Congress in President Clinton's term, and he used the line item veto 82 times to eliminate provisions within bills as a way of cutting out what he called pork in those bills, so funding for things that were unrelated to the overall bill. But then it was eventually challenged in court and declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And this is how our government has always operated. The three branches of government constantly jockeying to retain their powers and make sure the system of checks and balances is kept in place. So the question of whether the president should have impound powers is debatable. Presidents would argue that it is one of their most important tools to prevent wasteful spending authorized by Congress. But the question of who controls the power of the purse is not debatable. That is clearly assigned to Congress by our Constitution. So a president, including President Trump, can't simply decide to defund policies that they don't agree with.